So last year they finished 4-11-1. This year, I have them finishing 7-10. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's pretty close. I have them finishing at 6-11. So I think we're right around the same ballpark. They're on their way to becoming a good offensive team. They're an offensive line short of becoming a good offensive team, in my opinion. That's going to be their biggest downfall. The other issue is obviously they're in a pretty tough division. So I just think that this is going to be too much for them long term over the course of the season. And then obviously there's the possibility that, Burrow doesn't make it through half the season. So very difficult to say.
As far as just like the Bengals' opportunity here within this conference to succeed, like you mentioned, I do think it is through their offense. Zach Taylor, he doesn't seem long for this league as he goes into his third year. Obviously, to really succeed in a place like Cincinnati, you have to have pelts on the wall, and Zach Taylor doesn't have many of them. In fact, with 2 subpar seasons going into the season, it looks very much likely that should they not finish above 500, which is going to be a little bit more difficult given the added game, currently 7-10, looks a lot uglier than 7-9 with those 3 games under 500 there. I do think that this is Zach Taylor's unfortunate last year. Now, coming at it from the fantasy perspective, because of course this is the Fantasy Football Podcast, the Slumpbuster Fantasy Football Podcast, there are some players of note. Of course, Jamar Chase, the big rookie draft signing this year, joins T. Higgins in that locker room, and T. Higgins had a very good year. And then Tyler Boyd, who's always just been a consistent fantasy performer, particularly if you're in a PPR league, and always a must-have. And then Joe Burrow, before the injury, he was looking great. He was fun to watch. He was someone that you wanted in your lineup. I wanted him in my lineup, but it was not meant to be. Who out of these guys is really going to command that wide receiving core? Because that's I think is the big story of this team.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think this is kind of like where where things sort of part, if you will. There's the who's going to be the most productive, but then who's going to be the most or the biggest value pick from a fantasy perspective. So if you go and look at PFF rankings, PFF actually has T. Higgins projected as the wide receiver 13 this year. That's really high. Fantasy Pros has T. Higgins projected as the wide receiver 24. In both instances, they have him like severely projected well ahead of Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd. So because of that, I actually think Jamar Chase is going to likely be the bigger value because I just don't see T. Higgins ultimately commanding that much of the opportunity load from Joe Burrow. So to me, I think T. Higgins will probably out target share or out dominate Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd, but I don't think he's going to ultimately produce that upside, especially the PFF rank at wide receiver 13. I think it's just way too high in my opinion. But the other thing that's really interesting is that depending on, again, what rankings you sort of look at, most rankings have all 3 players inside of the top 36, which means that somewhere, whoever's doing these rankings or the collective ECR, people think that Joe Burrow is going to sustain at least 3 wide receiver 3s. That's a lot. I don't know if it's going to happen, especially if people think that Joe Mixon's going to now get more of this workload in the not just the running game, but the passing game. So I just don't know that they're that great of an offense, given that they're still, I mean, they finished last season 21st in run blocking and then 27th in pass blocking. Like they obviously opted to not improve their offensive line. I don't know where the improvements are going to come from. So I think they're going to be off the field faster than they're able to sustain this type of volume that people think that they're going to have. So while they're good, I just don't think that they're going to be that good yet. Like they're on their way. They're just not that complete.
Think about the offenses that we have seen that have been able to sustain 3 wide receivers at that pace. You harken back to the Rams, which that is where Zach Taylor came from. That is where Zach Taylor's football lineage resides, with the 3 wide receiver sets that the Rams were rolling out during their Super Bowl year. Now, 3 very talented guys, and how they compare to Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and Brandon Cooks. I think there is some comparables. Now, I guess it just comes down to, do you think that Joe Burrow can be at that Jared Goff year, have that same kind of, what am I looking for?
Yeah, I kind of understand what you're saying. Yeah, output. Yeah. Well, because I think the thing is in the end, it's like, it's definitely possible, but do I think that you're going to sustain 3 wide receivers above 36 finishes and also one of them like verging on a wide receiver 1? It's very difficult to do that. So yeah, the odds are against him.
Oh, definitely. Then the other big fantasy performer on this team, of course, is Joe Mixon, which is a controversial person in the fantasy community, mostly because he still is getting drafted within the first couple rounds. And Joe Mixon certainly does have that type of upside week to week. However, he does tend to be on the sidelines more often than he's on the field. And that is one of the big things. However, with that said, you can't predict injury. It's tough. You just have to believe in the talent. And certainly Joe Mixon does have the talent, but this is, again, where that weaker offensive line does come into play and hurt his value. With the added weapons, do you think this makes Joe Mixon certainly a more enticing fantasy play this year?
Yeah, so I've notoriously been a very anti-Joe Mixon human being for the past 2 to 3 years. And so far, I have been right all 2 to 3 years. Now I shouldn't say right in a sense. Like, he's had decent years. Like, he's rushed for over 1,100 yards. But the problem is that he never finishes quite where people expect him to finish. And we're looking for that top 5 running back breakout, and it just doesn't seem to come. I will say, of all the years that he's meant to perform well, this would be the year. And I think a lot of his knock has been that he's not been performing on third downs. Like, they take him out of the game on third downs and Gio Bernard is in the game. Now there's no Gio Bernard, and they expect Joe Mixon to be either the pass blocker running back and sort of the chip and run and get that dump off pass to accumulate some of those PPR points, and or like the true goal line back all the time. So if the workload is there and the volume is there, he can do it. He is talented enough, but will they do it? Because every year we expect him to have that workload, and every year he just doesn't have that workload. So your guess is as good as mine. I still don't feel good about it. I am going to avoid Joe Mixon. I don't really care if he ends up becoming a top 5 fantasy performer. I've had the headache once. I drafted him one time. He's an absolute nightmare if he doesn't perform well. He's quite literally your biggest nightmare on your team. So I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to find someone else who I like around that value, and I'll go with that person instead.
Sometimes it's not always about the talent. Sometimes it's just like who's going to cause you the most headache week to week. And I definitely do think that is someone like Joe Mixon when you constantly see that Q next to his name as well.